to Shifra, and Jesse and I will fade into the darkness.
Welcome to the second Social Vision Conference. I'd like to take you back to tranquil Vancouver Island. It's a quiet Shabbat morning, and I'm the first child awake in our vacation cottage. I tread down a winding staircase, peering through massive windows at the magnificent forest that surrounds us. My father sits below in deep thought, surrounded by holy books. I patter down the staircase and I grin, remembering we had this great big oak that stood outside of our home. And seeing the forest and seeing my father reminds me of the time when my father said, "If anyone tries to take this oak down, I'll chain myself to it." As a child, that imagery made me laugh, but growing older, it challenged me to ask and learn more. "What are you learning, Tati, Dad?" I ask. "Oh, hi. It's not for you. When you're older, you'll be able to understand." It was a great ploy, and I fell for it, of course. "No, please tell me. I can understand now. Can you learn with me, please?" And so the day came that I earned a seat at the table of wisdom. We opened the book of Tanya by the Hasidic philosopher Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Look out the window. Do you see the giant trees that surround us? How many leaves do you see? Can you count them? And each leaf connected by veins to a branch in order to receive nourishment? That couldn't just happen. Every leaf in this world was created with purpose by the one great creator, Hashem. Nothing happens by chance. Every detail of this worldly masterpiece is designed with precise intention. From that morning on, a leaf could never be plucked absentmindedly. A blue jay flying by had purpose in its song. And every person that I met had a soul, a purpose, a unique journey to be had. My name is Shifra Sharfstein. Hi. And today I am privileged to be the Rebbe's shlucha and representative to Georgia Institute of Technology and Georgia State University. Every Friday night, over 100 brilliant minds gather in our Chabad house for the Shabbat experience. These are the futures of Google, Facebook, Apple, every tech company out there. This week, I let them in on a secret. Exactly 71 years ago tonight, a crowd of broken Jewish souls crowded into a tiny synagogue in Brooklyn. That night, the Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, issued a challenge. Many see this world as a jungle, a place where evil reigns and nature rules unpredictably. But in truth, King Solomon tells us that God views this world as a beautiful garden, his precious garden, the place that he truly wants to be. That night, the Rebbe held our hand and allowed us a glimpse into the future. A world in which humanity would value every natural resource that we hold. A world in which all people of all places would be seen as equal creations of God. A world in which you engineers and future leaders, I told our students, would work as God's gardeners to plant more roses and to finish the great work that God began for us to complete. As we say every Friday night, that God created this world with work to be done. in our hands. The key is in your hands. This week, all of us here together gather to celebrate social vision, the vision we were gifted by the Rebbe that empowers each of us to see the future and do everything in our power to get there. Our journey begins now. We'll enjoy a myriad of topics from diversity to education, legal and prison reform. Today, though, we begin with the great big oak, environmentalism. So enjoy. I'd like to introduce Professor Benjamin Selznick, Assistant Professor of Strategic Leadership with a focus on post-secondary analysis and leadership at James Madison University. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that wonderful and very inspiring story and introduction there, Shifra. Yes, so I want to welcome everyone as well, and thank you all for taking the time out of your lives and busy schedule to join us for this introduction and for as much of the conference as you are willing and able to engage. These are busy times of year with a lot going on. I know for me, if you hear someone in the background, that's my 2-year-old daughter running around in the working from home life. So I wanted to thank you first just for making the time to be here today and to join us. So yeah, I guess I want to give greetings on behalf of myself, James Madison University here in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and in a small way, as part of the theme of this conference, from the kind of partnering, we'll say, academic community. I think one of the initial opportunities that this conference can provide is for academics and folks who work with students and folks who think and study and folks from all across the kind of spectrum of learning to come together. And for academics, this is a really great opportunity. My panel on Thursday brings together folks who have never met before. We're bringing in people from Montana to Ireland, which is kind of the fun and unique part of being able to do a Zoom conference. So I think, as far as the opportunity for academics to really engage the book, to really engage each other, and to certainly, we hope you will participate, really engage the audience here. I think that's crucial, right? These are the types of dialogues that sustain and engage us. So I do want to pull out 2 small nuggets from the book in concert with other works. One is this idea that in social vision, as Shifra mentioned and alluded to, we are trying to build something better, right? We are trying to envision what they talk about as envisioning a reciprocal society in which each individual is empowered to achieve true happiness through making a meaningful contribution to the welfare of others. And that's such a powerful statement. And I hope it's one that can guide our thinking and our learning here. But even just, if that's a long statement, the one that stays with me is this idea of a reciprocal society, right? One where there's exchange, there's reciprocity, there's back and forth. And of course, there's synergies, right, that build on this kind of idea of the atomic goodness that we're all striving to put forward. And so I think whether you're looking at the environmentalists, the education, these kind of things, that anchor of reciprocity, I hope that can serve as something of a guiding theme. And the second one here, and this is as an education person who works with college students and such, what I love, and this comes from another book by Arya Solomon that recently came out, and I've read in concert with Social Visions. And you probably have heard this before in some other ways if you are a student of the Rebbe in any capacity. It's this idea that the Rebbe, repeatedly stated that in education, no moment is too early, no detail inconsequential, no interaction incidental, and no effort ever unproductive. I mean, if those don't inspire you to want to fully engage and take something away, because in our learning journeys, right, whether it's college students coming to Shabbat, that's why I'm here, by the way. I was a college student at Dartmouth College in the early 2000s. I went to the Chabad there with Rabbi Gray, and all these years later, I'm still engaged and still learning and still growing. So those, you never know what little moment's going to have a big impact, and that's a story we see time and time again. But as you think about it for yourself in your own engagements this week with the conference, out of the conference, right? This idea that all learning is kind of continuous and continual. This isn't where learning happens. Learning happens all the time, everywhere, if we are open to receiving our experiences as learning opportunities, right? But this idea that no interactions incidental and no effort unproductive, right? I think those are just great ways to frame our own learning in conjunction with this wonderful book that I've found on reading and rereading and thinking through to be very inspiring, to be very fulfilling. And honestly, to be very motivating. I read it this summer, and it was a long and hard fall for many of us, and then these are not the easiest of days. But a book, and that articulates and brings a comprehensive understanding of the Rebbe's social vision that we, as Shifra alluded to, that we, all of us on this call, are integral to achieving. Right, this vision doesn't just happen without us. We make it happen and we bring it into existence, right? So, I found this work to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to many of the conversations and panels. I hope you will engage in your own learning, whether it's writing notes, asking questions. People think asking questions are the only way to engage, and that's a part of it, but certainly taking notes, reading, and following up, and all of those wonderful ways we can engage and build a community, right? Build a community around and connected to this fantastic book. And so on that note, Jonah, I think we're going to turn it over here to the authors, to Philip and Michael Wexler, who are going to give us provide an introduction and speak a bit about their efforts with the book. But thank you all so very much. It's really been a great opportunity to be here. I hope you'll come to as many sessions as possible, fully engage, and remember that everything we're doing this week in and out of the session is learning toward achieving the social vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Jonah, can you see us?
No, I just asked you to start your video.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
There we go. That looks more familiar. Well, Shifra, thank you for that ray of sunshine. What a wonderful way to start the morning. And thank you, Ben, for those very sublime remarks as well. It's just a nice day when you get your brain back into this zone, because as we all know, it's easy to get caught up in the exigencies of modern life and forget about some of these more uplifting ideas. But Philip and I won't go on too long. It's like being at the movies, right? These are the previews. Previews are fun, but you don't want to have too many. Anyway, I'm Michael Wexler. I should have said that from the start. One of the co-authors of the book, along with Ellie Rubin and my father over here, Philip Wexler, the executive director of the Institute of Jewish Spirituality and Society, or Jewish Society and Spirituality, however you want to say it, and also the primary author of Social Vision. Philip and I have talked about these ideas on many walks up at the lake where we are now, and we're very excited personally that Social Vision is being discussed, but even more so that the ideas in it are being contemplated, because as we think about in the book, I think we can all sense what we call the cultural chrysalis underway, that the old ways, the old model is breaking down and something new is coming forward. And this is perhaps a cycle of history, but it's an exciting moment to be on that precipice and to think about what could be in that blueprint. So on that note, to continue the previews, Philip, did you want to say anything?
Well, I'm sure I did. But there's quite a lot to say. And most of it, I would say, at least comes from here. And it comes from our saying of it, our feeling of it, and our thinking of it. And that's something that is very unusual, that we really feel it, and we believe in it, and we think it. And once we do that, we're transformed. That is, we're transformed. What does it mean to be transformed? We're transformed into a different mode of being. Not that we're the same, but that we're a different mode of being. We have a different way of being. And as we're being in the world, it feels different. It feels like it's a different world that we're living in. And that's what they call JCC, and that's what they call this. But it's the world of difference. It's the world of difference. And that's the world that they want to hear. So I think it's a world that's different. I should say more?
I think that was perfect.
Okay.
Do you have anything more to say?
Well, of course I have more to say.
Well, maybe, I mean, do you have anything more to say right now?
Right now. Of course I do.
No.
No, I don't. But you get my drift. My drift is go with the flow.
Thank you, Philip. As you can see, it was a pleasure for us to work together finally on a project. And wise words, you know. I think transformation is a big word. Anyway, Jonah's gonna pull us off the stage now with the cane. Jonah and everyone who's watching, thanks for indulging the humble authors for a few minutes, and we look forward to being involved in the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wexlers. That was such a blessing to hear you guys speak. And now we have about 12 minutes until our first official panel of the day. So this can be a little bio break to get a snack or go to the bathroom for everyone watching. And we'll see everyone back here at 11 o'clock sharp to jump into the conversation. So yeah, great. I'm just gonna put the Wexlers back into the attending session. Thanks, Wexlers. There we go. And I see Jon and Sandra have joined us up here. How's it going? Great to see everyone. Oh, let me turn on my lights so I look a little better. There we go. Maybe too red. And we're just waiting on we're waiting on Steve still, but he should be here soon. You know, he's got 12 minutes. So if you guys have any questions to start off with, or any about how this is going to go, Jesse is going to be your moderator, so I'm actually going to hand it off to Jesse.
How's it going? Good to see you both.
Hi.
Yeah, let me know if you have anything lingering. Great, beautiful.
So, Jesse, what's the lineup?
So the lineup, that's a great question. The lineup is you are going first, Dr. Lubarsky, and then you, Dr. Erickson, and then hopefully Steve Brenner will join us soon, and then he'll go last.
Okay.
So you speak in that order first, and then after that, you'll all have a chance to kind of respond to the other panelists' thoughts in that same order.
Great.
Great.
Okay.
And in the meantime, before 11 o'clock, if we all turn off our videos, unless you have questions, if we all turn off our videos, we can have a slideshow going for the live stream of just the program. Great.
I'm good. We'll see you at 11.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Hey, Jonah, can you still hear us, or are we off?
You're on now, I can hear you.
Okay, but are you going to remove us back to observer at some point?
Yeah, I thought I just did, but I'll do it now.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know. Can you see us as well?
We can see you, but yeah, I'm gonna put you back into the attendee session. Give me a sec.
Right. I mean, unless you want us to sit here on camera the whole time, but I didn't think you wanted to do that.
I don't think so, yeah. Here.
That was nice, huh?
Yeah, it was great. Um,
Well, Shifra and Ben were like amazing.
yeah, yeah. So actually, we're actually still live streaming right now, Michael, just so you know.
Well, I've said, I believe in everything I've said.
I know. Okay, I'm gonna push
Yeah,
you
if you
back
wanna,
to D,
yeah, if
and
you want to get rid of us, no problems.
and we should. I don't know why it's not. Denise, why can't I push them back into attendee role? It's not working. Oh, maybe it just worked. Okay, great. Now I'm gonna turn off my video.
Okay, hi everyone. We're just about ready to begin the first panel of the day. Good to see you. Hi, Dr. Lubarsky.
Hi.
Great. Okay, beautiful. Good morning, Dr. Brenner. Okay, great.
No,
Thank
good
you guys
evening.
all so much. Good evening, yeah, that's right. Thank you for calling in from Israel. Yeah, beautiful. So this is the first panel of the first day of the Social Vision Conference series. And it's my great pleasure to be moderating this panel on the future of planet Earth. My name is Jesse Noily, and I work as a coordinator here at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and Society. Before we get into this great panel this morning, I just want to quickly plug the other two panels we have going on later today. There will be one on Earth, Wind, and Fire, the Dawning of a New Day. And then later in the afternoon on spiritual ecology. Those are both environmental ecology themed panels like this one this morning. So if you're interested, please come back to the same Zoom link at 1 and then 2:30 later on, or sorry, 3:30 later today. Those will be sure to be great events. And then later at 5:30 today, we have a workshop if you're interested in getting more into texts, acidic texts having to do with ecology. That will be happening at 5:30. And please, I think Jonah will be dropping a link. Please just shoot an email to director@spiritualityandsociety.org if you're interested in coming to that event, expressing your interests. And there will also be, you can see a document there with all the sources we'll be using in that event. Hasidic sources having to do with ecology, with the environment. So if you're interested in these themes, please be sure to check that out. There's also a link to the website if you haven't visited there already. And the website has all these resources included there. Okay, great. So without further ado, let's begin. I'll start by introducing our first panelist. Dr. Sandra Lubarsky has spent most of her years as a university professor and administrator, bringing sustainability into the curriculum and into campus activities. She founded one of the first graduate programs in sustainability, the MA in Sustainable Communities at Northern Arizona University, and chaired the Department of Sustainable Development at Appalachian State University. Sandra currently serves as president of Flagstaff College. Dr. Lubarsky, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. It's really a pleasure to be a part of it. And I'm very happy to have read Dr. Wexler's fascinating book and to have learned about the breadth and depth and the compassion and the passion of Rabbi Schneerson's thinking. It's the Rebbe's call for resacralization or re-enchanting the world that's my starting point today. So much of my own work over the past several decades has focused on the need for re-enchantment and for developing what I've called strategies of re-enchantment. For the Rebbe, resacralization fundamentally involves overcoming the bifurcations that separate human life from the source of life. He speaks of a world permeated with value and of God's presence throughout the created world and of the human capacity to enhance God's presence. He also speaks of the inadequacy of a mechanistic metaphysics, the problems with philosophical materialism and with a materialist society, the reality of free will, the centrality of relations, and the imperative to engage with the world. The whole body of his work is directed toward establishing life-sustaining and life-affirming relations. Rabbi Schneerson's call for resacralizing the secular dovetails with the telos of sustainability. When we talk about a vision, a sustainable vision for the future, we are talking about how to establish life-sustaining and life-enhancing ecological civilizations. Though he doesn't use this language, the Rebbe's view of the world is an ecological worldview. It engenders the practice of sustainability as holy work. I want to talk about the importance of beauty to this effort. Beauty is the way we describe encounters with vitality, with life-affirming patterns and relationships. It's the way we speak about the sustaining and flourishing of life in relationship with life. Think for a moment about your own encounters with beauty. With all the forms of life that sustain life, with buds and blossoms and babies and bodies of water and kindnesses and generosities, because goodness is a form of beauty. When we encounter beauty in one form or another, we feel a heightened sense of being alive and a kinship with life. To think of beauty in this way is to free it from the narrow constraints of either art or advertising. Beauty is, I think, one of the plain facts of our experience. It's a part of our deep evolutionary memory. We associate beauty with life-affirming conditions arising as part of the miracle of relations that constitute the structure of life. A healthy ecosystem is predicated on countless fine-tuned adjustments. In biological terms, these adjustments are to a range of variables that include such things as temperature, humidity, genetic variation, and species distribution. Now, in aesthetic terms, millions of life patterns are interwoven, each pattern enhanced by the others and contributing to the enrichment of all scales of life. What we have come to identify as beautiful are those patterns of adjustment that enable and express life. Aldo Leopold, the founder of modern wildlife ecology, was right to add beauty as the third principle in his taxonomy of sustainability. A thing is right, he said, when it tends to promote the stability, integrity, and beauty of the biotic community. In addition to stability and integrity of parts and whole, a biotic community needs to be alive in a way that produces beauty. Though it is not generally noted in the litany of environmental loss that includes fresh waters, soils, rainforests, coral reefs, innumerable species, all of those things that are endangered now, beauty is also very much a casualty of ecosystem destruction and the increase of human demands on the planet. Its absence is conspicuous in the decapitation of mountains in Appalachia, for example, in coal ash pits heavy with toxic waste, in ghost forests along the eastern United States coast, salt killed by rising sea levels. Between beauty and ugliness is a zero-sum game. When beauty is lost, it is replaced by ugliness. Just as evil is not simply the absence of good, but a very potent force for attenuating life, so ugliness is not simply the absence of beauty, but a devitalizing force, disruptive of the delicate adjustments of life. When particular forms of beauty are gone, they are as lost as the passenger pigeon or the great auk. But we rarely note the loss of beauty, not because it isn't real or because we aren't disturbed by it, but because we have been trained not to take beauty into account. Our disregard for beauty's importance is a byproduct of the modern turn away from an organic worldview to a mechanical one. That change in direction has been so successful that we are hardly aware that there was a time when beauty was the most admired of values. Like children who are amazed that their parents were ever young and attractive, it is a surprise to learn that for the most part of Western thought, the whole structure of life, nature included, was understood as suffused with beauty. It is only with the modern scientific worldview that beauty became irrelevant to knowledge. The dismissing of beauty went hand in hand with the idea that the natural world is a machine, valueless, except for its utility to human beings. The philosophers who shaped the modern worldview had a passion for the mathematical and the mechanical, and they created a philosophical system that gave rein to these enthusiasms. The order of nature came to be understood as a mechanical order. Reality was understood to consist of forms of matter. Nature was depicted as a machine, and truth was reduced to statements that could be demonstrated mathematically or measured empirically. Beauty was transformed from an objective quality of life to a subjective personal judgment, irrelevant to knowledge production. Instead of being the value most closely associated with the patterns that sustain and enhance life, beauty was reduced to a matter of personal pleasure. And that's where we are today with things. Our continued trivialization of the value of beauty is evidence of the unremitting grip of the mechanistic worldview on us, The reintroduction of beauty as a fundamental quality of life challenges this picture of reality, calling out its life-denying principles and assumptions. It overturns materialism and its claim that the really real things that make up the world are senseless and valueless units of some quantifiable measure. We begin to see then that the world is not a bare fact to be known only by its physical dimensions. We begin to see that it is filled with value and with feeling beings whose value contributes to the richness of experience. Rabbi Schneerson knew that the resacralization of the world depends on renewing our commitment to a picture of reality as permeated with value. And there is much in the Jewish mystical system that affirms the relationship between beauty, life, and God's presence in the world. In my limited understanding of the tradition of Kabbalah, Tiferet, beauty, also called Rachamim, compassion, is the central emanation, the balancing point between love and judgment, Hesed and Gevurah. The Kabbalah scholar Daniel Matt describes the union of Tiferet and Shekhinah as, quote, the focus of religious life. I am fascinated by the role beauty plays in the tradition of Kabbalah, and I hope this point of convergence between the Jewish mystical tradition and the argument I have made in favor of beauty's role in re-enchanting the world will be explored by people who are more knowledgeable about the mystical tradition than I am. The re-enchantment of the world requires a new metaphysics. Bringing nature back to life will entail returning beauty to the world. And likewise, returning beauty to the world is necessary, revivifying nature. As a lesson for the future, let us begin to talk about beauty as a central ecological and religious principle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lubarsky. That was beautiful. Before we move on to our next speaker, I want to just briefly remind everyone that we do have a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you're attending over Zoom. And I would encourage everyone, if you have any questions, to please write them there. We'll have some time allotted at the end of today's panel to answer those questions. Okay, great. So moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Jon Erickson is the Blittersdorf Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy at the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources and Fellow of the Gund Institute for Environment at the University of Vermont. He has published widely on climate change and renewable energy, while leading international research and educational programs as a Fulbright Scholar in Tanzania and teaching worldwide. Dr. Erickson.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me and to this amazing panel. I feel really honored and blessed to be here. I want to thank Benjamin Murray as well, a former student of mine at the University of Vermont who connected me to this group. It's been really, really fun to reconnect with him after all these years. So as Jesse said, I'm an ecological economist, so I feel like I've been on a similar journey that many folks in this conference have been in reading Social Vision and really kind of engaging with the sacred and trying to integrate across different ways of knowing, different ways of being, different ways of learning. That's been my journey as an ecological economist towards my own work, towards kind of moving towards a more a oneness or a more embedded view of the economy. The person embedded in family, the family embedded in community, the community embedded in society, the society embedded in the Earth system, and the Earth itself embedded in ever evolving universe. This kind of embeddedness and interconnectedness has really been the hallmark of this work in ecological economics. Again, reading Social Vision, my own work reminds me a lot of the work of Herman Daly and John Cobb. Herman, an economist, and John Cobb, a theologian, who combined efforts in the 1980s and wrote a beautiful book, For the Common Good, kind of with a similar sort of approach or journey of connecting what Herman calls creating a kind of practical dualism, which has really guided a lot of my work. On the one hand, we need to respect basic empirical facts and natural laws of how the world works. But on the other hand, we need to hang on to a kind of self-conscious purpose and will, moving towards what Sandra was talking about, a kind of higher set of values grounded in beauty. Not the monism of reducing everything to economic value, which is how I was trained as an economist, or the monism of reducing everything to atoms and particles, kind of what Sandra was describing as kind of this reductionist view of the world. But this practical dualism of hanging on to both the means and ends of human society. Again, this striving towards a kind of embedded view of the person, the embedded view of the economy, has been a hallmark of ecological economics. Traditionally, the work of economists has been quite narrow, right? It's been limited to this idea of how do we allocate scarce resources to meet desirable ends. And they've been very, very, very human-centric. And what is a resource, right? And what is a desirable end? And if you will, economics has been kind of trapped between what you might call intermediate means and intermediate ends. Intermediate means has reduced humans to labor, has reduced nature to capital, and then to kind of own and allocate these things, particularly in a capitalistic system or even in a socialistic system, towards intermediate ends that are again determined by human-centric needs and wants. The work of ecological economics and my inspiration of Herman Daly and John Cobb's work has been to kind of expand outward, if you will, not from just this intermediate means and intermediate ends, but out to what Herman has called ultimate means and ultimate ends. This has been this journey of ecological economics, this journey of practical dualism, this journey of, again, respecting the basic laws of a self-conscious two things, the ultimate means and the ultimate ends, and then circle back to the work of social vision. The ultimate means, how the universe works, has been most explored, probably the piece of this practical dualism that's been most explored by ecological. And it has had that kind of reductionist flair to it, right? Talking about the essentialness of the laws of thermodynamics ultimately constrain the economic system. The first law being that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So there is no waste. It doesn't just go away. It's always and everywhere with us. And the second law being the entropy law, you know, that everything with the blessing of the sun, we're able to sort of move things back up the entropy ladder and keep an ordered world. First and second laws of thermodynamics, coming to terms with the true ultimate means of low entropy matter energy, has pitted ecological economics against other more mainstream views of the economy, right? It reveals that the infinite growth model, which our economic system is built on and aims to follow until its untimely death, the infinite growth model really comes up against material finite limits of this Earth system. This exploration of ultimate means forces us to explore the causes and consequence of what geologists now call the Anthropocene, right? Imagine the gall of humanity to name a geological epoch after ourselves, right? but there's some truth to it, that we live in a human-dominated world, and human processes and human societies have become a global shaping force. And so the signaling of naming this geological epoch after humanity is, again, a kind of economic lesson that boils down to, what does that mean for our economic truths or our economic ways of knowing that were born of a very, very, very different time in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century than today, with humans as a kind of global shaping force. So this has meant that ecological economics has really argued for moving away from these quantitative oriented goals, right? That more is always better, that we always need to expand, that the economic system depends fundamentally on a growing subsystem within this limited finite Earth ecosystem, shifting the attention away from these quantitative goals, for example, of ever-growing gross domestic product, towards more qualitative goals. And Daly and Cobb made this distinction between growth and development, right? Growth being quantitative oriented, development being quality or qualitatively oriented. So this has helped move towards a kind of better understanding of what is possible and what is realistic in defining then what are our intermediate ends. Like, what is the economy for anyways? Is it for just to create more stuff, more consumption, more consumers, and less citizens, and less stability, and less resilience? Or is it to move towards, even in a very human-centric way, towards a higher quality of life, a higher quality economy? But the idea of practical dualism says, well, that's not enough. We have to move from those intermediate ends, right, of high quality of life, of human security, of fulfilling our needs and wants, towards ultimate ends. And this, I think, is where the true intersection is with various forms of exploring spirituality, including this journey of social vision and reflecting on the work of the Rebbe. So on the ultimate ends were really explored quite extensively in the early years of this creation of an ecological economics, but I would say ecological economics has really lost its way. It's been kind of dominated by either the material basis of the economy, right, boiling everything down to energy and matter, or it's been dominated by, let's play the rules of the game and reduce everything to economic value, right, everything to dollars and cents. And that has sidetracked us away from really sort of hanging on to this original charge, to hang on to what the means are, but always and everywhere look towards what our ultimate ends are. This early collaboration of Daly and Cobb was really quite fantastic on exploring our ultimate ends. The work of E.F. Schumacher and his exploration of what he called a Buddhist economics and bringing in Eastern mysticism has really helped shape the early years of ecological economics. The work of Alfred North Whitehead and his so-called process theology was a really early kind of exploration of these ultimate ends. And I think now learning about social vision and the work of the Rebbe, I mean, I think there's a beautiful intersection and kind of further using Jewish mysticism to explore this idea of ultimate ends, ultimate purpose of what this economic system is for anyways. So the goal of all of this, and my own students are exploring indigenous mythologies, Eastern mythologies, old ways, new ways, everything in between, right? It's just such a rich conversation now around these ultimate ends. And to me, they all kind of intersect at a goal of enabling a flourishing Earth, inclusive of all humanity. A move away from this Anthropocene narrative, right, of human domination, and towards what geologian Thomas Berry called the ecozoic, and that kind of vision of a world where humans live in a mutually enhancing relationship with Earth and the community of life, which connects, I think, very strongly with this idea of reciprocity. So from social vision, I'm really sort of heartened by the idea that ecological economics has been exploring what is called in this book, the sacralization of science on one hand, right? I mean, we have to sort of reflect on and use and know the realities of what science has discovered and told about how the material world works. That one end of the practical dualism, but always and everywhere hanging on to the other end, the ultimate ends. And what the Wexlers say is a dynamic re-enchantment, right? With the earth on the other end of the spectrum. A dynamic re-enchantment of enabling a flourishing earth and a flourishing human community. A new narrative in my world for the economy built on principles of interconnectedness, on principles of reciprocity, and ultimately on striving for a vision of oneness with the universe. So thank you for the opportunity to read this book and learn of the Rebbe's work and to be on this fantastic panel. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erickson. That was very inspiring. And I want to encourage everyone once again to leave any questions for Dr. Erickson or Dr. Lubarsky in that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Okay, great. So our final speaker for this panel is Dr. Steve Brenner. Dr. Brenner is an expert in atmospheric sciences and physical oceanography from the Department of Geography and Environment at Bar Ilan University. He holds a BS in meteorology and physical oceanography from the City College of New York, a doctorate in meteorology from MIT, and his research focuses on various theoretical and applied aspects of the past, present, and future ocean circulation of the Mediterranean Sea, the Gulf of Eilat, and the Dead Sea. Dr. Brenner. Oh, Dr. Brenner, you're muted, so.
Unmute myself. Okay. So first of all, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here. I was not sure what to expect, to tell you the truth. I thought that I would be a little bit out of place, being maybe one of the few, if not the only, physical scientist who's participating. But I think we have a lot to share, and I think we have a lot that we can learn from each other. I will start by saying that the timing of the conference is very appropriate in terms of the calendar and where we're at in the Jewish calendar right now. I'm not sure if this was a consideration when you planned the dates, but it certainly is appropriate for several reasons in general for the conference, and specifically for this session on environmentalism. And so if you look at the calendar, this past Shabbat, this past Saturday, in the Hebrew calendar, was the 10th day of the month of Shvat, which was the day that the Rebbe took on the leadership, the mantle of leadership 70 years ago. This coming Thursday is Tu B'Shvat, is the 15th day of the month of Shvat, which we know is the new year for the trees. And so here we see the very significant ecological, environmental aspect. And just one other point, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneur Zalman, taught us that we are supposed to live with the times. And his interpretation of living with the times means looking at the weekly Torah portion and seeing what we can learn from it and apply it to what's going on around us at the time. And if we look at the sequence of the Torah portions, both last week, next week, and I think the following week, it really puts it in a very interesting perspective. And so that last week we read the portion of Bo, which is the portion of the book of Exodus, which actually deals with the details of the Exodus, the actual Exodus from Egypt. And I think one point there that's very relevant to what I'm going to talk about, which are manifestations of the laws of nature that we find throughout the 5 books of Moses, is that the first commandment that was given to the children of Israel as a nation was the commandment to establish the calendar. Interesting. And so I'll talk about that a little bit further on. We also read part of the 10 plagues in the Exodus, and again, I'll refer to that. next week's portion is the portion of Beshalach, and the central theme in the portion of Beshalach is the splitting of the Red Sea. So here again, we have this connection to laws of nature. And in fact, that's probably one of the greatest abrogations of the laws of nature that we've seen. And the week after that is the portion of Yitro, which is Mount Sinai and the receiving of the Torah, which was the ultimate joining of the physical and the spiritual. And so what I want to do in the few minutes that I have is I'd like to, first of all, try to understand within the context of the 5 books of Moses and the Rebbe's view of environmentalism, how we can understand this. And I would say that reading through the book of Social Vision, it very clearly, I think, tells us that yes, the Rebbe dealt with ecology, he dealt with environmentalism, but not as a separate issue. I think his vision was holistic. And so he saw this very much as something within his positive view towards science and how it related to science and technology. And unlike many other ultra-Orthodox rabbis, the Rebbe embraced science and he embraced this progress and looked for the positive in it and looked for ways to use it to our advantage. He also, the social vision, I think in chapter 6, also gives us an indication of how the Rebbe sees our relationship to God and our relationship as individuals, but as a community, and how we interact and affect not only each other, but the cosmos. That each person has a value. Each person has a value as an individual. Each person has a value as a member of a community. And one of the points that I think is emphasized very nicely in the book is that the sum of the community is more effective than the individual parts. And so it gives us the strength to go to places that we couldn't have gone otherwise and to achieve things that we could not have achieved otherwise. I think in general, not just the Rebbe, but in general, if you look at Hasidic teachings, Hasidic masters, it very much focuses and emphasizes our relationship with God and our relationship with God in terms of what man's function is in the world. And if we had to boil it down to one specific function that man has, a central function that man has in the world, is to find what are called the hidden sparks of spirituality and holiness in the world, to reveal them. And each of us as an individual has a responsibility to find those sparks that were set aside for us to discover. And so to discover them, to uncover them, and to raise them back up to elevate them back up to where they should be, their proper place. So this is what Hasidus tells us about man's function in the world. I think the Rebbe many times emphasized also that if one looks around at the environment, at nature, I think there are 2 Hebrew phrases that sum it up very nicely. One is Marabu Ma'asecha Hashem, how great and how wondrous are your deeds and your actions, dear God. And the other is B'chol Drachecha Da'ehu, that no matter what you do in your life, you should be aware of and in touch with the fact that it's all meant to bring you to a point where you recognize the holiness in the world. And that's what we're here for. So what I want to do is really take you on a whirlwind tour in probably 6 or 7 minutes of the 5 books of Moses, with a focus on several key events and commandments and mitzvot that are related to nature, laws of nature, and the environment. And I'll do this by interspersing certain commentaries from Rashi. Rashi was one of the preeminent Torah scholars and commentators, lived in 11th century France. very prolific, with an extensive commentary on all of the Tanakh, all of the Bible, and the Talmud. And his commentaries are considered fundamental and foundational, anybody who learns. And so if we look at the Torah, it goes very much through a sequence which begins with the general or universal, which is creation, and eventually takes us to the particular. And the particular is what we call in Hebrew the mitzvot tluyot ba'aretz, the commandments that are very specifically related to the land of Israel. We know there are 613 commandments. Many of them can only be performed if one is in the land of Israel. And so that gives it an additional significance and specialness. So if we start with creation, we know that God created the world, and he created the world, interestingly, through the power and faculty of speech. And not only that, if we look at the description of the creation, the story of creation in the first chapter of Genesis, it is done with a very specific name of God. It's done with the name Elohim. And that name Elohim is the name that is, first of all, if we take what's called gematria, which is numerology, you take each Hebrew letter has a numerical value. And if you compute the numerical value of the name Elohim, it is equivalent to the word hateva, nature. And so there we see that God has embedded himself in the world. He's there, and he's there for us to find and discover. It also is associated with what is called the sphere of Gvura, which is might. I think Sandra mentioned some of this sphere out. It's might, power, severity, and even withdrawal or restraint. And so when we refer to the name Elohim and Hateva, it's God as he manifests himself in nature. And it's for us to seek it out and to appreciate it and to understand it. But then if we go into the next chapter of Genesis, we see something very different, something very interesting. And the story repeats itself. And we know that the Torah does not repeat words for naught, that there has to be a reason for it. And if one reads the second version of the story very carefully, we see that the name that's used to create the world in the second story is a combination of two names of God. One is Havaya, the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is the name that's associated with God's essence. It's the name that's associated with Chesed. Chesed meaning unlimited benevolence and kindness. But it's Hashem Elohim, it's Havaya Elohim, it's the two names together. It's the melding, as if to tell us, and we learn this in Hasidus also, that the world was created and destroyed many times until the final formula was achieved. And it was achieved through the melding of the two names. And so it tells us the world needs both. To have severity and withdrawal and restraint, the world cannot survive. But to have unlimited and unbounded kindness and benevolence, the world also cannot survive. It needs the two to temper each other. And by tempering each other, we get the third sphera, which Sandra mentioned, which is called Tiferet, which she translated as beauty. And it's the melding of the two. And that's what allows us to exist. We also, if we look back at the story, it gives a very clear progression of the different levels of existence, of creation. And it goes from the inanimate, next to the vegetation, living creatures, and on the sixth day, man is created. Man being the pinnacle of creation. In Hebrew, interesting that it's called in Hasidus, it's called Domem, Somer, Chai, and Medaber. That it's the inanimate, it's the vegetation, it's living creatures, and man is referred to as Medaber, the one who has the faculty of speech, the one who has this faculty of thought and communication, which is unique. If we then go forward a little bit, then we come to the next aspect of the story of man, which I think many people who look for sources of environmentalism and ecology in the Torah will point to the function of man in the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, it very clearly says that God placed man, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden for the purpose of cultivating. So on the one hand, to benefit from the world, but also to protect it or to guard it. And so here we have probably the original source for what might be seen as environmentalism within a Torah related context. We then go on. The next major event that we find is the story of Noah, flood. And so here we have this rainfall followed by a cataclysmic flood. But interestingly, if we go back to the names, the flood is brought, the decision to bring the flood and to destroy the world, to purify it, was done through the name Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, Havaya, the name of mercy, which doesn't make sense. You look further into the story, Noah is in the ark, and it's the name Elohim, the name associated with severity, that actually rescues Noah. And so the Rebbe explains here that through prayer and acts of the righteous, one is able to convert and transform one attribute to another. A very, very interesting and crucial point for us to remember. Ultimately, the flood concludes, and here I think is a very important point with all of the concern and discussions of global change and where the world might be headed. The flood concludes with God's promise to never destroy the world again because of man's actions. He very clearly says that the laws of nature will continue, will not be abrogated. And the sign that we have is the rainbow. And so every time we see the rainbow, we are reminded of this covenant that God made with mankind, not to destroy the world, not to completely destroy the world again. Now, what I'll do is fast forward to the book of Exodus. And as I mentioned earlier, book of Exodus, the first commandment that we see that's given to the children of Israel as a nation is to establish the calendar. And establishing the calendar, we're told that the calendar is to be a lunar calendar. The lunar calendar is the one that we use for reckoning the year, for reckoning the months, and for reckoning the holidays. At the same time, however, we're also given a very, very specific indication that it needs to be calibrated with the solar calendar. And the solar calendar, in a sense, is the calendar of creation. You see, there are two clocks running here: the clock of creation, and the clock of creation, which is what gives us the 7 days of the week and Shabbat, and the calendar that we're responsible for. So there's the clock that God is responsible for, and there's a clock that we're responsible for. But we have to reconcile the two. We have to calibrate the two. We go on into that parsha, which is last week's parsha, which is the Exodus, and the 10 plagues. Well, the 10 plagues, for all intents and purposes, were amplifications of natural events, maybe natural disasters, if we will. But it's clearly telling us that God granted Moses the power to harness the forces of nature and to use them to achieve the goal of the Exodus. We follow that with the splitting of the Red Sea. And the splitting of the Red Sea, we would see or take as perhaps one of the biggest abrogations of the laws of nature. To make water stand up like that and separate is not something that we can physically do, no matter how much we try. But there's a very interesting word that appears there. And it says that after the Red Sea was split, it returned to its previous state. And the word that's used in the Torah is Vayashav hayam le'etano, that it returned to its strength, which is a very, very odd word to be using. And if we look at Rashi tells us that it returned to its original strength, or original condition, and that if we rearrange the letters, by rearranging the letters, we get a different Hebrew word. And the different Hebrew word we get is t'na'o, that it returned to its original condition, but a condition that God made with the sea when he created it. That the time would come that the sea would have to give up its laws of nature temporarily. Okay, and only then will it return to its original state. The final aspect, which I mentioned, is Mount Sinai. And Mount Sinai, the giving of the Torah, which again, as I said, was probably the ultimate merging of the physical and the spiritual. And so here too, there were events that transcended nature. We know, for example, it says that they were able to see the sounds of the shofar and see the sounds of the booming voice of God. So that mixing of our senses is transcending what we normally understand and expect. And here I'll bring one very brief teaching of the Rebbe, which I always repeat at this time of the year. I think it's fascinating that one of the things we know about when it says that there was this booming voice from God, one of the Midrashim says that there were no echoes. And if one asks such a loud sound, inevitably there would be an echo. And so the Rebbe explains, he gave a very interesting physical explanation for it, which again, I find fascinating. He says that we think about what is an echo. An echo, he says, is when sound waves hit a physical barrier and they return, they're reflected back, we hear an echo. If there was no echo, it means those sound waves were absorbed into the medium, into the earth. And so he tells us that the booming voice of God at Mount Sinai was absorbed into the earth. And so this holiness from God at Mount Sinai was absorbed into the earth to be there forever. It says, Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf, a booming voice that never ended. And so this is really a fascinating explanation. And the last thing I'll mention is again, the various commandments, mitzvot, many of which are agricultural, which we find that have an environmental implication, ecological implication. And the prototype for them, interestingly enough, is what's called Shemitah, which is the 7th year. In the 7th year, we're supposed to let the land rest. So 6 years, you work the land. The 7th year, you have to let the land rest. And this is the prototype that's given in the parsha at the end of the portion towards the end of the book of Numbers. And it's specifically, this mitzvah is associated with Mount Sinai. And one would ask, what's the connection? Shemitah, a commandment that's dependent upon the land, is something they would only do minimally 14 years down the road, if not longer, after the 40 years that they spent in the desert. And so here too, the Rebbe explains that it had to be real to them. They had to understand the significance of these commandments. There are many others. I will cut it short here. And I just want to go back and touch on one point that which I think was a very nice point that Sandra raised when she talked about beauty. I think that in many ways, if we look back in previous generations, that there was an appreciation for the beauty of the world, for the physical beauty of nature, something that we've lost in many ways. I think they were in touch with nature without technology. They were able to understand and feel things and connect with nature in a way that we have lost. We've lost that ability. And perhaps that's one of the things that we need to recover. And one only needs to look, I think, in the book of Psalms. In the book of Psalms, if you read it, King David infused this book with descriptions of the beauty of nature, which are unbounded. And so these are certain abilities, I think, that we've lost. And perhaps this is one of the things that we need to go back to appreciate when we try to understand the spirituality of the world and the spirituality of nature and the world around us. So again, thank you for inviting me to participate. And it's fascinating.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brenner. So with our last 10 minutes here, I want to just take a little bit of time to allow each of you to respond in just 1 or 2 minutes to the thoughts of the other panelists. If you like, you can feel free to pass if you have nothing left to add. But beginning with Dr. Lubarsky.
Well, what a joy to listen to both of you. It's really a conversation I hope will continue. I do want to just be clear about my own training, especially in terms of what Jon was referencing with the Cobb and Daly book, that I actually am a student of John Cobb's. I was fortunate enough to study with Jon, and he was my dissertation advisor. So I've been very influenced by Whitehead. And, you know, it's Whitehead's statement that the teleology of the universe, he says, the teleology of the universe is directed toward the production of beauty. And I think that is, at other times he says it's directed toward the production of intensity. And I think beauty and intensity are closely related in terms of that, that way of talking about what kind of life, what kind of relationship with life we are trying to have. And it's not just this quantity of life, it really is this quality of life. And Jon, I'm so interested to follow up with you on how you address then, as you say, this kind of default that's happened to ecological services, that we've remained within this very Anthropocene, anthropocentric system, even though we've recognized that we need to break out of it. And boy, it's such a difficult task to move from one paradigm, one worldview to another, which is what I really value about what Rabbi Schneerson has proposed. So clearly recognize that although we've had these gifts of modernity, that they're insufficient, especially when it comes both to human relations and relations with the natural world. So I would just like to also thank Steve. I really love what you said about this notion of just lifting up that God's promise after the flood was never to destroy the world. And it's a promise we need to make as well, right? And I would like to see us make that Noahide promise our promise. And anyway, thank you both for your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Lubarsky. Dr. Erickson, just a minute or so to respond to Dr. Lubarsky and Dr. Brenner.
Yeah, thank you both. It's really an honor and a privilege to be on this panel with you. I'll just emphasize this intersection of all these ideas, and the intersection that we're seeing of these ideas in society right now as humanity struggles for meaning, right? And as humanity sort of returns, I think, if there's anything that good that comes out of the pandemic, it is kind of a realization of how we are a part of the world, right? And the earth will evolve, and disease will transform, and pandemics will come and go, and that we can't kind of continue to separate ourselves from the world as a defense. And I feel that my field of economics has been a master at separating from other disciplines, separating from other worldviews, a kind of dangerous isolation that has honestly been quite successfit, right? Economics has been a very successful field in terms of dominating higher education in particular, but has also made it quite dangerous, quite unhinged from both the material universe and spiritual guidance and sacredness of the world around us. So I'm encouraged by this intersection. I'm in my own work, I'm quite critical of the kind of Islamic, Judeo-Christian foundations of higher ed. I think it's kind of gone a bit off the rails, and sort of this human exceptionalism and kind of creating a kind of education system according to human needs and wants. So in our own work, exploring other narratives, other worldviews, a more embedded view of humanity, knocking the human off the top of the ladder of nature, if you will, and embedding humans in the world, I think it's a different interpretation of the creation story that Dr. Brenner is talking about, in a different sense of shifting from a kind of narrative of mastering the universe to this sort of true stewardship, but stewardship in communion with the rest of the world. So again, I think all of these writings can be interpreted in so many ways. And I love to see the interpretations that move more towards interconnectedness and wholeness.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Erickson. Hey, Dr. Brenner, just a minute or so to respond, if you like.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, I found both of your talks very interesting. I already related to Sandra's talk in my conclusion when I talked about beauty. In terms of environmental economics, John, I have to tell you quite honestly that is those are things that have really bothered me as an environmental scientist, and certainly when dealing with students, it's always a question of how to address it. So much so that one of the field courses that I teach when we go out into the Dead Sea, into the area of the desert around Eilat, we talk about the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is declining. The level's going down and down and down. And as a straw man, I throw out to the students and I say, so what? Who cares? How many people live in the Dead Sea? What's the economic value of it? And I know that's a provocative statement because there are other values which we can't measure economically. And so I really appreciated hearing you say what you said about how economic and environmental economics has taken a turn that's not necessarily been the most helpful.
Thank you so much. We do have just a few minutes left, so I want to pose a question that was asked in the chat to Dr. Erickson from none other than Michael Wexler, one of the authors of the book. Dr. Erickson, how can we reconcile your very astute considerations? Your very astute considerations of reality with the possible adoption of a mystical ontology. Can you see that in the Q&A box too? Dr. Erickson?
Yes, yeah, I'm just bringing up the Q&A now. Yes. Well, I think this reconciliation is this journey of integration and interconnectedness. I find in my reading that as you get to the limits of folks who've kind of gone down the rabbit hole of material explorations of the world, you reach the kind of edge of mysticism and philosophy, and that's where this sort of true integration and interconnectedness happens. I think, I love reading, for example, Fritz Kapter's work on the Tao of physics, right? Because here's a physicist grappling with Eastern mysticism, and in his exploration, realizing that the two are so much more intertwined than a traditionally trained physicist would ever imagine, or a traditionally trained theologian would ever imagine. And that's why when I read Social Vision in preparation for this conference, I immediately thought of this partnership between John Cobb and Herman Daly, right? Because here's this theologian with an economist kind of working together to try to find those connections. And I think they are there. I just think we very often talk past each other. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we do have to wrap up now, but it's been such a pleasure to have the three of you here today. Once again, let me just plug. So we'll have a short lunch break now from 12 to 1, and then we'll return at 1 for a panel called Earth, Wind, and Fire, The Dawning of a New Day with Eric Picard, Bill McKibben, and Rebecca Marcevich. And then we'll return at 3:30 for a panel on spiritual ecology with a series of other very exciting panelists. And then once again at 5:30, we'll have actually a kind of hands-on workshop reading some Hasidic sources on ecology and the environment. So if you're interested in participating in that event, please check out, please reach out to us via the email that we just put into the chat, director@spiritualityandsociety.org, and also check out the sources in the link provided there. So once again, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. See you again soon. Bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jesse. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, everyone.